have a mandolin. That's a solid part of that. Ask me if you can use it. You gotta get that. They're hard enough to tune regularly.
Joe, did you tune it to this tuner?
432. No, I changed it to 432. You might want to check it though, because it could have gone out like that. Yeah, I just switched because the cords are off. Sorry.
I can't do anything about it.
Also, if I walk it,
That's why I was gonna say, should I?
gotta bring it here. My cord won't reach.
Huh?
Is that tall enough? Is that too tall?
No, it's not.
Too tall. Hold that. Hold that. Hold that.
Hold this for me.
you wanna go, sister. That don't make you wanna go to heaven. I don't know what does. They say there is no heartache there, and no more curse of sin, no sickness and no cross to bear, and death can't enter in. No fighting and no battlefield, no war, no enemy, where the lamb and lion lay side by side in a land of perfect peace. Oh, if that don't make you wanna go, brother, that don't make you wanna go, sister, that don't make you wanna go to heaven. I don't know what does. Violin, fiddle, instrumental, that's not here. No worries and no more to fear. Our faith will be made sight. It's a glorious land of endless day where Jesus is the light. I got a lot of friends and loved ones there, a Savior I will meet, and I'll lay my crown of jewels down when I bow at Jesus' feet. Oh, if that don't make you wanna go, brother, if that don't make you wanna go, sister, that don't make you wanna go to heaven. I don't know what does. I don't know what does.
That's good. Amen.
One would think that it was strange to be clutching an old shoe, unless you knew all the days of doubt and fear it brought her through. He'd found her in his field, this poor stranger to his race, but in his heart she soon had found a very special place. He longed to give her rest, knowing well what he must do. He gladly paid the purchase price, confirmed by that old shoe. It's more than just an old shoe, it's a token of his grace, reminding her of his great love and the price that her Redeemer paid, assuring her that she can endure whatever she will face. It's more than just an old shoe, it's a token of his grace. It's weathered and it's worn, It's old but tried and true, and some have said it's out of style, and I need something new. But the comfort that it gives tells me nothing else will do. It's brought me much too far to cast aside like an old shoe. It's more than just an old shoe. It's a token of His grace, reminding me of His great love and the price that my Redeemer paid, assuring me that I can endure whatever I will face. It's more than just an old shoe. It's a token of His grace. It's more than just an old shoe. It's a token of His grace, reminding me of His great love and the price that my Redeemer paid, assuring me that I can endure whatever I will face. It's more than just an old shoe. It's a token of His grace. One would think that it was strange to be clutching an old shoe, unless you knew all the days of doubt and fear it brought her through. Troubles and trials that are in your way, you've prayed for strength, but all you feel is pain. Your faith is failing, you don't know the way, but God is there. You can hear Him say, you can make it. He's gonna work it out. You can make it. Just trust Him and never doubt. It may seem hopeless now, but He's working it out somehow. You can make it. He's gonna see you through. You can make it. He said He'd never leave you, no matter how big it is, no matter how hard it gets. You can make it. Weary and you're worn from all that is wrong. You've tried to sing, but you can't find your song. You wonder if it's really worth all you're going through. But listen closely, He's calling now to you. Sing, you can make it. He's gonna work it out. You can make it. Just trust Him and never doubt. It may hopeless now, but he's working it out somehow. You can make it. He's gonna see you through. You can make it. He said he'd never leave you. No matter how big it is, no matter how hard it gets, you can make it. If you're in a storm or you're fighting for your life, don't be discouraged. He's by your side. So friend, take courage and don't give in. He's sending now the message. He's assuring you again that you can make it. He's gonna work it out. You can make it. Just trust him and never doubt. It may seem hopeless now, but he's working it out somehow. You can make it. He's gonna see you through. You can make it. He said he'd never leave you. No matter how big it is, no matter how hard it gets, you can make it. You can make it.
All right. I appreciate you being here this morning, and I hope and pray you've been getting a blessing out of the meeting. We're going to hear from some preachers this morning, but I'm going to take just a few minutes maybe to give you something that might help you, and then again it might not. When you say some of the things that I'm going to say, you put yourself out there, and what some of you folks in the congregation don't understand is that preachers are easy targets because they talk and they have to fill time a lot. If people were as hard on newscasters and weathermen as they are on preachers, it'd be an entirely different world in which you live. But the problem is, a preacher gets up and he says things, and a lot of times while he's thinking, he says things he shouldn't say. And the Lord knows that we have a vault series that no one will ever get. We call it In the Vault because of some really stupid things that I've said while I've been a preacher. I mean, stupid things. I mean, just arrogant, obnoxious, foolish, crazy, and you have to own it. And in the moment, you think it's good. And even when I first came up, that was considered to be real preaching. You could say certain things in the pulpit, and they'd be like, "Man, he's really flinging it down." And all you're doing is making a name and a reputation. And sooner or later, that chicken comes home to roost, and you have to eat your words. And so I want to deal with you just on a couple of things in the first little section here, just a little bit of teaching. And again, it may not be worth a lot to you, but take your Bible and open to Exodus chapter 3. You don't need to stand, but would you consider listening for a moment? I had a little bit of experience as a policeman, and we did a little bit of stuff to do with training. I was in charge of the field training units and stuff. This is when Brother High Cove was just coming on, and Brother Waters was just coming on, and they were young, strapping young men, and I had already been there for quite some time and stuff, and so I was given the responsibility of being in charge of training. And one of the things that our instructor did when it came to firearms is that he would instruct the individuals to go out there and just stand literally 7 yards. At those days, it wasn't even the push and shoot at 3 yards. It was just 7 yards. So from here to the end of the pulpit right there. And all he would say is just pull your weapon. This is in the days of revolvers now. Before we switched to Glocks, that's a whole other thing when we had to retrain everybody. But here's the thing that happened. He would say, just go out on that, and as the best you can, however long it takes you, just put 2 holes in the paper somewhere. So you got a silhouette target, they call it, the black over the white kind of a deal, and you're supposed to put 2 anywhere in there. It doesn't matter. Aim for the belly button, and you might hit him in the head kind of a thing, Don't aim for the head, and I'm aiming for the right eye, and I'm, all that kind of stuff, because that's not how combat shooting is. What you're basically doing is you're shooting while you're running. That's what the truth is. It ain't no Wyatt Earp standing there in the street, and quick draw and all that kind of hoping you're shooting and hoping that he's ducking while you're running. That's what you're hoping. As a matter of fact, they used to teach us to shoot the floor, and at least maybe you'll catch them by a ricochet, but that's better than shooting over their head. So anyway. And then here's what he would do. After they had done that for a couple of days and real relaxed, they go out and everybody just pretty much got to the point where they could literally punch holes in the paper from 7 yards. Now, you've got to understand, we're training some people that had never really done anything with a firearm. And so that's a whole nother deal. But after a couple of days, people got accustomed to the routine, and it's kind of like, okay, go out on the target at the whistle and 2 rounds and then scan and holster. That just means, make sure everything is, all the bad guys are down, and put your gun back in the holster and then stand at the ready. And then blow the whistle and do it again and do it again and do it again and do it again. And then here's what he would do. Okay, today we're going to change this just a little. Today I want you to do exactly what you've been doing, but you have 3 seconds to do it in. Now, 3 seconds is longer than you think it is. But in their mind, that's 3 seconds. So now we have added one thing to the equation. It's time, and time has now put pressure in a condensed form on an otherwise easy task to be able to take care of. And you've been doing it now for days, but now all of a sudden we add to that equation the pressure of time. You would be surprised how many of those individuals, both men and women alike, some of which were actually marksmen that were pretty good, had been standing there for 2 days and punching holes in the ticket and in the paper, in the target, and were yawning and rolling their eyes and, wow, this is police training, what's the big deal and all that. You'd be surprised when we added a time factor how many of them didn't even hit the paper, let alone the target. You say, what's the point of that? You're in a condensed time right now. The Lord has now all of a sudden put a parenthesis on the back of the sentence, and now what's happening to you is happening at a much faster pace than it was before, but it's like an espresso machine. Now, you might have had your Starbucks this morning and get your Grande or get your Gargantuan or whatever the things are that are there, and you're drinking that, but it only really has a little bit of coffee in it and then all the other stuff of whatever you put in there. And then somebody gives you one of these things with a little tiny cup, about that high and about that big around, and they squeeze or compress this coffee in there that's as black as shoe leather. And all of a sudden, that little tiny amount gives you about 14 cups of coffee in 2 sips. And you're thinking, that ain't nothing. That's just a little bit of coffee. What's the big deal about that? Yeah, but it's a whole lot more intense, because it's a lot more condensed. So now the issue becomes, a lot of you think, well, I'm in the ministry now and I'm going to go to Bible school, or I'm going to make a move, or I'm going to go somewhere else. I'll give you a couple of stories about that, because most preachers want to do what God wants them to do, and then God begins to deal with them. And God begins to say, oh, they think, well, should I move here? Should I go there? Should I go take a call to preach? Should I go to Bible school? Should I go to Pensacola? What is it that I ought to be able to do? That's called by some people finding the will of God. I call it getting direction. You call it whatever you want to call it. And again, when I say what I'm about to say, there's going to be people in here going, oh, that's a bunch of baloney, man. I don't believe that kind of stuff and all. Go ahead and look for your burning bush. I don't care. But there's only one of those in the Bible for a reason. Because God doesn't speak to you in a burning bush anymore. You got to be realistic, Well, God told me. My foot, God told you. Everybody that's ever left the church here has always told me God told them to. They come to me, well, God told me to go. And then they get mad because I don't try to talk them out of it. It's like, I can't trump God. God told you to go? Well, okay. What am I going to say? Well, why didn't you try to talk me out of it? You said God told you to go. He's the big boss, right? See, some of you don't understand the principle of authority. You don't understand that when it comes to Aaron, Aaron has oil poured on his head, and it's the same oil that's on his beard, and it's the same oil that's on a linen garment. You know why linen? Linen doesn't soak up the oil. You say, why? So that the oil at the bottom of the feet is the same as at the head, because the garment didn't soak it up. But sometimes we get an extemporaneous extension that sticks out there, and now the oil is running out here, and by the time it falls down, it's no longer falling to the feet, because some hemorrhoid stuck out here and draining all the attention. So you go to church and you make it about you instead of making it about Him. You divert the oil. You don't walk into a place that's been around for 25, 30, 40 years and step in there into that stream without understanding. You just stepped into a flow of things. And you got to find out how that flow is. You don't all of a sudden go, divert it to me, and I'm going to do... No. You just stepped into something that's been there for a while. And gentlemen and ladies, that ministry doesn't exist for you to have a ministry. You just stepped into the flow, so what do you have to do? You got to kind of learn to get into the flow of what's going on there. It's not all of a sudden it's time for me to shine. I hope I'm going to help you with what I'm going to show you, but the idea is this: there's too much individuality today. We become independent of independent. We become too rebellious by nature. And so what happens is we don't understand there's a flow, there's a principle of authority that's in line. And if you want God to use you, if you're so stinking hard-headed like Jonah, He is going to keep on pounding you until He breaks you. He's not going to make you quit and, oh, well, if I'm not going to use you, I'll kill you. He'll just keep knocking on you until He breaks your fool head. Some people are hard-headed. The reason you keep having trouble, some of it is because you won't listen. Amen. And God says, okay, well, I'll just keep on. You say, why? He cares about you. Amen. But He can't use an unwilling spirit or an unwilling servant. He won't do it. Right. People tell me all the time, I'm in the will of God and I'm doing this. I can tell by how they're talking. They're an ass. They're not an ox. Yeah. You say, why do you say that? You ever read your Bible? You ever wonder about when Elijah called Elisha? He's plowing with what? He's not plowing with asses. You know why? My papa taught me that two asses together almost never make a good team, because they're always fighting against each other. Oxen, you know what they do? They don't care, man. Do your side, I'll do my side. It don't make no difference. We're going to plow no matter what. You know what an ox does when he gets stuck? I learned this from reading the memoirs of Robert E. Lee. You know what he does when he gets stuck? That ox goes down on his knees and he just leans harder into the traces until that thing breaks loose, and then he'll get on up and get moving. You know how that ox walks? He don't walk like an ass. You know how that ox walks? Head down all the time, just looking where I'm supposed to be plowing. That's how he walks. He ain't pretty. He don't look good, but he'll plow all day long. He's not fast. He's not fast. But boy, he's good in the mud. You get horses stuck down here in Florida. When Lee came down here, most of you don't know that he was an engineer long before he was a general of an army, and he was an engineer. And he's down there and they're plowing or tearing up stumps and stuff in the swamp and all that, and trying to build some bridges and all that and some footpaths. And there's an old black guy down there, and he went to Lee and he said, hey boss, he said, them horses don't work good in the swamp. And Lee had enough sense to listen. And Lee said, what do you mean? He said, well, when they get stuck, he said, all they do is struggle against the mud, and then they waste all their energy against the mud, and by the time you do get them unstuck, and he said, you'll spend more time getting them unstuck than you will plowing up anything. But he said, when you do get them unstuck, they're so tired, all they want to do is lay down. And Lee said to him, he said, well, how do you get the stuff taken care of in conditions like this? He said, you need oxen, boss. He said, oxen? He said, yes, sir. He said, an ox, when he gets stuck, all he does is get lower to the ground. He doesn't complain that he's stuck. He just hunkers down and leans up against it and keeps going. Lee had a whole flat top, whatever they call those barges and stuff, brought down full of oxen. People thought he was crazy. And they went out there and said, man, them oxen are too slow and they don't do what needs to be done, and you'll take forever to plow that. Nobody can control an ox and so on and so forth. You know how you control an ox? Little old tiny ring. That ox will go anywhere you want him to go. You know what he learned? He learned that once you let that ox know what it is expected of him, you don't have to do anything with him. You don't even have to have a harness on him. You ever seen a good ox plow? He doesn't even have a harness on him. They take him out there and set him in the row. He'll plow all day long. He's got enough sense to know my job is to plow. I'm not a show pony. I'm not out here trying to win, you know, a reward for an award for confirmation for how I look. My job is to plow. You can put that ox up and then give him a little provender, give him a little hay or get a little oats or something like that, and you can put him up. You don't even have to put him in the barn. Matter of fact, he'd be just as happy outside the barn as in the barn. You know what an ass wants? Put me in the stall and clean the stall and make the stall nice, and I'll let you know if I want to plow for you in the morning. You know what Lee learned? Lee learned that when it comes time to plow, that ox is standing at the gate. He knows what's expected of him, and he walks out there and goes to his field and goes to the job. And you have to go in the barn and clean up the ass and make sure he's ready to go and make sure it's okay and talk him into it and plead with him and beg with him and get him out there. And still, he may sit down on you in the middle of the job. You say, why did you think that? You know what the Lord says? You don't plow ox and ass together. You say, why? One of them is going to always be demanding the attention. It won't be the ox. How come the Lord says when He's talking about to the congregation, you know what He says in 1 Corinthians 9? Thou shalt not muzzle the what? Ox. You mean He referred to me as an ox? Yeah, an ox, not an ass, for a reason. In the Old Testament, you know, He refers to the one their line has gone out. You know what He refers to them as? Oxen. Why? People say, well, He's likening me unto the devil. Well, you can be the devil. But He's likening to you one of the greatest, most majestic animals in all the Bible. Just an ox. You say, why? That's the ministry, gentlemen. You could understand that. It's not about limelight. It's not about spotlight. It's not about show. It's not about your cotton-picking reputation. I'm the boss. Okay, you know what you just showed me? You ain't. You have to tell everybody who you are or point to the stars on your clusters on your shoulders or the scrambled eggs on your hat. You ain't nothing. That's why some of you men going around this weekend telling everybody, I wear the pants in my family. I bet your wife picks them out for you.
That's good.
Now, I hope I can just give you a couple of things here that might make some sense to you. I talked to a painter the other day. As a matter of fact, I had talked to Brother Pilkington, and I ran into a painter somewhere else, and I just asked him a couple of questions to kind of line up with what I'd learned from Brother Pilkington, and I said, can I ask you a couple of questions? I said, yeah. He said, yeah. I said, how long have you been doing this? He said, 35 years. I said, 35 years? He said, yeah. And I just looked. I just looked. He's got a truck with ladders and paint and all that. But sometimes we judge how successful somebody is by how many employees they have. It's like he could read my mind. You know what he said to me? He goes, I've had the big company. He said, I've had the people with Sherwin-Williams and Benjamin Moore on their shirt and the painter's hat and painter's breeches and all that stuff. And he said, there's a reason why I work by myself now. He said, it takes me a week now to do what I used to could get done in a day. But what a lot of people don't know is that I had to go back at the end of the day, and it would take me a week to straighten out what people that thought they were painters, because they had the shirt on, because they had the hat, because they had a brush in their hand, thought they were painters. He said, you know, it took me years. I watched him. I was just in a hurry. I was going somewhere, and I just watched him for a second. He had a brush, and so I pick it up. That brush was full of paint. I'm thinking, man, that scares me to even think about it. He's running that thing and running a bead right there next to that baseboard. He ain't even got it taped off or nothing. Man, that thing looks like he's drawing with a ruler, drawing a line through that thing like that. And he dips it in there. He don't brush it up against either side, too much paint, all that. And then he takes that thing. I mean, he cuts that thing in like Rembrandt. I said, how'd you do that? How do you do that? And he said, 35 years of experience. He said, but you know what? He turned around, he's shaking his brush at me now. He said, you know what? He said, you'd be surprised how many people try to come out here and their first day or two of painting, they try to paint baseboard without taping it off because they think because they're wearing the shirt, they know how to paint. They think because they graduated from Bible school, they're a preacher. They think because somebody gave them the privilege and the honor of being the pastor of a church that they are a pastor. Just because the title on the door says pastor. And then the Lord has to come along and spend a week fixing what took us a day to mess up. You say, how do you know? Been there, done that. Got the t-shirt, coffee mug, baseball hat, placemat, pen and pencil set, engraved keychain, the whole 9 yards. Until I realized that just because you have a title don't mean you are. And what I want to try to help you with is you're hearing a lot of guys that are giving you some information here and they're good preachers and that kind of a thing, but there's one thing you have to understand about becoming a preacher or a pastor. There's some things that cannot be taught out of a book, and there's some things that are not on an MP3 or a CD. There's some things that are passed on by being at the right place at the right time, and you have to be there to hear it, and you have to receive it in the right spirit, or it'll pass you up. Somebody comes up to you. I've watched the old preacher do it on a number of occasions. And preacher, what do you think about this? And what do you think about that? This is just some practical stuff. I realize it probably boring you to tears, but I want you to listen to me. And he'd say, well, I think probably one of the biggest problems is that the younger guys don't listen. I thought, the school's full. He said, there's a difference in hearing and listening. He said, you see guys with a lot of potential, but then they walk up and ask you something and they don't do. You heard it from Brother Mike. They don't do what you tell them to do, so you realize they ain't listening. They heard you, but they ain't listening. And I thought, that's pretty profound. And I was at a meeting one time. I was in Mount Airy, and I had written out a sermon there, and I basically had a sermon that basically targeted everybody in the crowd that stood out. The women that were overdressed the wrong way, and the men that were doing this, and the ones that were out by the cemetery out there smoking cigarettes, and the easy stuff to pick out. It was easy for me to find negative behavior. Easy. That's what I was paid to do for years and years and years. I don't have any problem at all picking out negative behavior. I see it. It just stands out on you. You can't hide from it. I recognize it. And when you try to hide it, it magnifies it that much more. It's hard not to put a scope on your rifle and just take you out. But that's what I was going to do. I had my message. Boy, I mean, it's right off the stinking altar, boy. It's going to burn their lips and burn their hide, and, you know, it's going to peel them down to a fare thee well. And, I mean, I am sticking geared up, and I am revved up like I've had 15 shots of espresso, boy, and I'm just champing at the bit, and I can't wait to get up there to preach before the other guy that's going to preach. The old preacher was preaching up there behind me. And all of a sudden, this old guy comes in the back. I don't know him from Adam's house cat. And the preacher, the pastor of that church, now this is a couple years after Preacher Lackey passed away, and he came up there to me. I was sitting on the front row, or second row, and I mean, I'm sitting up there, my engine's revving, you know, I'm up there, I'm ready to go. Boy, I'm going to rip him, boy. I'm going to rip him. Back in that day, that's real preaching, you know. You just get up and just get mean with people for no reason. Because that's preaching, you know, that kind of thing. You scare them, or you guilt trip them, or, you know, you just berate them, belittle them just to get a response out of them, because, you know, that's real preaching. Well, I am wired for sound. I'm ashamed to tell you what I'm about to tell you. I'm ashamed. And the preacher came up to me and he said, listen, I know you come up here, I know you spent a lot of money, and I know you're prepared to preach and all. He said, but a dear friend of ours just came in, and he's just happened to be coming through here, and he's here, and if it's okay with you, I'm going to have him preach. Well, you know, what are you going to say? I said, oh, no, that's fine. I completely understand. Yeah, inside, I'm thinking, man, you made a mistake. I got a message hot off the altar. This is the message. That's the devil. That's the devil. I'm sure it's the devil. I sat there, man, I am stewing. I am stinking, smoking hot, boy. And somebody walks by and I'm thinking, yeah, and I got you in my sermon too, buddy, you know. And Now I'm gonna add the preacher to the sermon because he doesn't know the will of God like I do. I know you've never done that. I completely understand. I'll get to this in a second. And Brother Pilkington, I'm going to get to you, but it might be just a little bit. And I'm making notes. And that old preacher gets up. He don't have much wind in his sails. I don't know that his voice ever even got much above a whisper. He didn't fling it down. He didn't rake them over the coals. He just got up and preached an old message on salvation. I'm sitting there thinking, salvation. This is saved people. This is Bible believers. They need their hide ripped off of them. Bunch of reprobates, bunch of backslidden, God-forsaken prodigals in the far country. This old man, what does he know about preaching? I'm ashamed to tell you that, but I have to tell you. You say, why? What my boss made me do. You think I like looking back 35 years? And telling you the mess I made? I'm sitting there. I still have the message. I am stinking fit to be tied. We get done with that thing, and Miss Betty Payne in those days, she came up to the piano. She's up there. She played the piano like a mountain piano, you know, even Invitations. It had sort of a little bit of a lick to it. She played up there for years and years and years. She came up to the piano. And that old man closed his Bible. And he made a plea for salvation. And 6 souls were saved that day. And honest before God, it was like the Lord just came and sat down and looked right in my face and He said, you think you had the message for the hour? I said, Lord, I need to be saved. Why do I remember that after 35 years? Because I was deceived. Because I didn't know nothing about preaching. Because I thought I was there to preach to my reputation. Back in those days, my friend and me were known as gasoline and fire. And I'd throw gas on him or he'd throw gas on me and we'd, light up the whole thing by just raking people over the coals. And then when God got a hold of us, along with the help of the old preacher, and we started backing down, people called us compromisers. Yeah. They're like, you're apostate now. Now stay with me. I'm trying to help you to learn something from my mistakes. Good. I can't believe my folks even stayed around. I'm leading up to something. So we're at a meeting, a big meeting, at a church up north, and him and I are preaching together, and the meeting got real good. And he leaned over to me and he said, hey, what you going to preach? The Holy Ghost has told me to preach so-and-so, Don't be questioning what the Holy Ghost... And he's like, what are you preaching? And I told him, he goes, don't preach that. I know you just sucked all the wind right out of there. Nobody's going to tell me what to do. Okay, you ass. See, what I didn't recognize is that he had a feel for the meeting in general, not for his own reputation. I didn't know that. And so I said, well, okay. I didn't say, why not? I'm about to preach. That's like when we're in Romania. He leans over after everybody comes walking in and you're up on a platform about as high as this thing here and everybody stands when you walk in and then you sit down and we're up there and he said, man, look down there on that row. And the guys down there, he said, those guys have been in prison for 14, 15, 16. He goes, there's old Morcon sitting there. He says, you know how long? He was in jail. Joseph was in jail 14 years for preaching Jesus. He's a repent preacher. He said, now when you get up to preach, he said, you give them something, okay? I couldn't spit cotton, man. And so I said, okay. He said, you have that message on so-and-so? And I said, yeah. He said, preach that message. I said, okay. I hadn't prepared that message, but it was a message I was familiar with. So now becomes this test of, am I going to trust the Lord to get me through the thing and do what somebody told me? Or am I going to, you ain't telling me what to do. God told me what to preach. Well, the truth of the matter is, as I've looked over my life and over my career, if you want to call it that as a preacher, I realize a lot of times it ain't God telling me at all. It's just me telling myself that God told me something. And you're the same way, and don't say you ain't. You preach what you're comfortable with, and then you try to go, God blessed it, and God was in it, and God blowed all over it, and all that. You don't dazzle me with the supernatural when you come in and the Holy Ghost of God came down and He spoke to me in a still small voice, and He tell me, okay, go join somebody with a Ouija board, man. It don't work that way. You don't spend that much time in prayer. I'm not impressed with that at all. That's not how preaching is. Preaching's what you are. It's not the title of a message. Are you younger guys listening to me? And an older guy says to you, there's something going on. If he has to explain himself and stuff, the problem ain't him, the problem's you. Now here's what that old preacher would do. If he told you to do that and you did what you wanted to do, he would write you off right there. I asked him one time, I said, I've tried to do the things you told me to do. You know what he said to me? It's profound. It's profound. He said, why do you think I keep telling you? You know what he just told me? If you weren't doing it, I'd stop talking to you. I mean, if I had opportunities, y'all think when I'm riding around with him all those years and stuff, and I'm not near as close as Brother Turner and Brother Donovan and some of those people that are over there with him every single day and stuff, but when I had him for a couple of weeks for 20 years, I didn't ask him, tell me about, where did Cain get his wife, and, who was at such and who's such a name, and what about the genealogy, and what about the asses under the myrtle tree. I'm asking him about meetings and how you get temperatures in meetings and how you turn up and turn down and how you sense things. You say, why? It's an amazing thing to me. I talked to a preacher one time and he says, all this fanfare, you signing the Bible and you're doing this and doing that and all that. And I said, well, brother, you just try to be kind to people and stuff like that. Dr. Ruckman didn't do it. And I stopped in my tract and I turned around, and I don't usually do this, and I looked at him with a stern face and I said, you ain't Dr. Ruckman. And just because you've seen him once or twice leave, you don't know what it is like to do 26 meetings a year for 50 years. And have everybody thinking that you ought to be where they think you ought to be, like a horse in the barn when they get ready to pull you out to run the Kentucky Derby, and God's telling you, I need you to go here. What is his statement back then? I've been up in the air longer than a seagull with sore feet. You think that's easy? You think that's fun? And the people at home are, I just believe you ought to be home. Why? For the one time you show up for the service? Maybe the reason I'm not there is because of, but I told him, I said, you ain't Dr. Ruckman. And you don't know what was going on with him at that time. I've seen him sit right on that corner right there for an hour signing Bibles and lining stuff like that. He don't like to do that stuff. But don't, because you saw him one time leave after the service was over, you say, why? I'm at Brother Lentz's. I'm just giving you some stuff here that are going to help you. I'm going somewhere. And Brother Lentz asked me to take him back to the thing, and it was right after the deal was over. And he comes by and he kind of just grabs me. He says, "Come on, man, let's go." And I'm thinking, "Good night, man." So we go out and get in the car, and we're in the car, and he's bumping his hand and doing this other kind of stuff. And I get in the motel. He said, "Okay, man, I appreciate it." And I said, "Well, I'm supposed to take some stuff up. We had a basket and some other stuff there, some chocolate and peanuts and other things." And we walk up there into the room, and he said, I got to get busy. He says, it's good to talk to you. I'll see you in the morning. I said, what do you mean you got to get busy? He said, buddy, I got 200 papers to grade. Oh, is that why you didn't hang around and fellowship? And instead of telling people when you got up to get out to say, folks, please excuse me, I got to go grade papers and I'm really busy. Instead, you just you mean there might be something going on in somebody's life you don't know something about?
That's good, brother. Thank you. Yep. Amen. Thank you, Lord. Amen.
You mean that just because you're the grand poobah with a crystal ball that you think you know what's going on in everybody's life?
Yep. Thank you.
I've never forgotten that. I thought that guy does more at nighttime after the service is over from 9 to 11 o'clock, and somewhere in there he's going to get his miles in than most people do in an entire day. Well, how does somebody like that get along? Well, it comes to willingness. So before we talk about sermon outlines, which we might, before we talk about prep and delivery, which we might, and some of the other things that I'd like to tell some of the younger preachers. Now, you younger preachers have to understand something. I get real concerned about, in a mixed congregation, about arming your congregation with stuff preachers should do and things I've learned after 35 years. Because it arms them to say, well, you're not all these things. So let me just give you folks that are in a congregation a word of caution. Every person in here is still in the training phase. And you can't compare them to the great heroes of the faith who through time and effort and experience have been able to be what you know them as. Very few of you, maybe Brother Turner is the only exception, knew that old preacher until he was about 65 to 90. Very few of you know him from 27 to 65. His greatest messages weren't 27 to 65, even though they didn't change. It was after he spent the time in the wine press that power was on him, and now you probably know him from 65. You know what? Most preachers don't even hit their stride till they're in their 60s. Having a DR in front of your name before you're 50 doesn't mean anything.
Yeah. Amen.
Nothing whatsoever. It's not just a title if there doesn't have the person to go with it. Now, how does an individual do that? So, congregation, be careful about looking at your preacher. Well, I just don't know what's going on. He's training. You think you're going to be like that big old bull back there when you walk into a gym and walk in there one day and you can't even bench press the bar, and you think you're going to go up and be able to pick up 400 pounds? You're smoking crack. You say, what does it take? Years and years and years of pain and training and things torn and things broken and things busted and going back and going back and going back and going back. That's the ministry, fellas. And folks in the congregation that are here, you have your pastors here and stuff like that, stop comparing them to other preachers.
Amen.
You say, why? They're training. If you'd spend more time praying for them than talking about them to others, then God might speed up their training. Maybe the Lord's retarding their training because they're preaching to retards.
Oh, amen. Amen. Amen.
In Ezekiel, it said, if the person is deceived, I, the Lord, have deceived that person because I deceived the preacher. I gave them exactly what they wanted. So you need to pray for my folks around here. How do I find the proverbial will of God? Are you in Exodus chapter 3? Look with me if you will. This is the story of the burning bush. I got to give you a little lead up. Moses messed up. It cost him 40 years. God had him banished to the backside of the desert. And like you already heard, he was on the backside of the desert and he was prosperous and he was connected with the king of Midian over there, and he was going to be the next guy in charge, and looked like everything was going. He's got a couple of boys. He's going to inherit the flocks and stuff like that. He's got a wife, Zipporah, and he's doing pretty good over there. He's not even looking for God. And then all of a sudden there's a burning bush. You see it in the passage? You know what he said? I think I'll turn aside and see. Now, there's something important about the way your King James Bible is written. As soon as he arrives on the scene and he sees that the bush is not concerned, turned aside to see, and out of the midst of the bush and said, Moses, Moses, and he said, here am I. Now, before he starts talking to him, he makes a request of him. The timing is important. Look at it. And he said, draw not nigh hither, put off thy shoes from off thy feet, for the place whereon thou standest is what? Okay, preacher, what's the big deal? The Lord wants to know if you're willing to do what He tells you in the little things before He tells you the big things. If you don't hear anything else I say, would you just listen to me for just a minute? God puts you to the test with the smallest of details to see if you're willing to obey an authority. And if you can't take orders, He ain't going to reveal nothing else to you. Anything you get's coming from another source. God is not going to put a preacher in the pulpit He can't trust to shut up when He tells him to shut up. God's not going to bless a man who constantly everywhere he goes is causing trouble. I graduated from Bible school. Okay, good. Now can you sit down and be quiet? You say, why? Because you graduated from Bible school but you don't know nothing. That's a zero, zip, hole of a donut. You say, what do you have to do? Take your shoes off. You know what He tells Moses first? Before I give you anything else, are you willing? You want to find the will of God in your life? You know what the Lord wants to know? Are you willing? Are you willing to go? But are you willing to stay? Everybody asks the question. The thing is not, Lord, reveal it to me and let me choose. No. Step number one, take your cotton-picking shoes off. If you won't follow the littlest order, the littlest detail, if you won't respect whoever God's put over you, then I've got news for you. The Lord's like, I ain't talking to you burning bush or not. I use the burning bush, I use the trouble, I use the storm, I use the trial, I use the tribulation to get your attention. Now that I've got your attention, you've turned aside, you've stopped to see, now you're looking at me. Here's what I want you to do. Lord, you're going to call me and I'm going to win the continent of Africa. What took Brother Paul 25 years to do in Moldova, I'm going to do in 25 minutes. Because I got a YouTube channel. That wasn't intended to be funny. You think because you have a YouTube channel that you're in the channel? You ever look at who has a channel? I guess you assume who you are by who it is that gives you the credibility. You're the next Dr. Ruckman because you can't preach a sermon without mentioning his name like y'all are. Because you're looking for another authority. You say, why? You won't take your shoes off. You won't take your shoes off. You won't let everybody else see your nasty feet. Take your shoes off, Moses. How come that Egyptian dust is in them, Moses? How come the blood of a murderer is in there, Moses? How come a rebellious person's in there, Moses? How come somebody that dropped the ball? Moses, let's see where them feet have taken you and what they done. What are you doing over here, Moses? Those shoes are supposed to be over there. You take them shoes off. They've been in the wrong place for 40 years. Moses is one of the greatest men in the entire Bible. He does more, 80 to 120, than most of us will do in an entire lifetime. But it started with the little things. He was a basket case. He gets taken into the palace. He's whacked out. He's in a basket case. Wouldn't you call him a basket case? He's floating around in a river with alligators and stuff in it. And then he's taken and he's raised in the palace. He gets a public school education. That must be what ruined him. If he'd have been homeschooled, it'd have been fine. And then he goes over there and he meets his real mom and he sees his real people and the Lord tugs at him. So, I got your attention, Moses? Yeah, Lord, you do. You know what I'm going to do? I'm going to take it into my own hands. Listen to me, preacher. I'm going to murder the people against my people. God didn't condone the murder. Several years ago, I had to preach a message called Some Sheep That Have Been Slaughtered That I Might Learn Something. The picture I had in my mind in that little building over there was the Lord walking up and saying, hey, how you doing, man? And I got kind of a kind to Jesus, just sort of says hello before he just jumps right in, unassuming. He said, how you doing? I'm doing good, Lord, doing good, doing great, doing wonderful. Well, I dropped off a few lambs here a little while back. I just wondering how they're going along. They get good breeding stock for you now and producing some wool for you, and they're not sick. You've been feeding them good and that kind of thing. This is how I had it in my mind's eye. And I have him looking up on my wall. And he says, what's that? If you've been in my office, you see a lamb's or a sheep's skin in there. It's right out on my couch, right directly in front of me. Every day I walk in there, I have to see it. Every time I walk out, I have to see it. You say, why is that there? Because I skinned a bunch of sheep. And you can't skin a sheep but once, you kill him. And the Lord said, where's my lambs? I murdered them. They were against your people. They deserved to die. The Lord said, well, you think maybe they were ignorant and they didn't know, and I didn't give up on Moses. He messed up. I gave him 40 years to get right. Kind of made a quick decision, didn't you? Thought I could trust you to take care of my lambs. They're stupid. They didn't know no better. They just needed some protection, need some help, need some instruction. I guess you got a great reputation out of that, huh, preacher? Killing sheep? I'm giving you a prep and delivery class. God allows you to preach. He's put you and entrusted you with His sheep.
Amen. Amen.
And He expects you to care for them. Well, now, preacher, you know, sometimes there's some goats in there. That's right. But you better be able to tell the difference in a goat and a sheep. And if they're His sheep, you better be careful about fixing His sheep. So I, guilty like Moses, I didn't have the blood of an Egyptian on me. I had the sheepskin blood. Well, time goes on, and I began to learn some lessons along the way. And, you know, I used to work downtown and all that kind of stuff and was doing okay there and doing okay monetarily wise. And the Lord came to me, you know, still a small voice through a period of time preaching and stuff. And He said, okay, it's time for you to say goodbye to your career now. And I'd like for you to go let the church take care of you. But here's what you don't know. He said, you're a big old bull in the pulpit, and you rant and you rave and you rip and you snort. And He said, you do everything, boy. I mean, you fling it down, man. Wherever you go, boy, you let it rip. How about it we see if you'll still preach the same way you preach when you don't have a six-figure income coming in. I was pretty deep into six figures where I was, even back in the day. I could go work an extra job and in 10 hours or so make enough money to buy a washer and a dryer and anything else I wanted. I'm not being smart. I'm just saying that was what the pay was for what you did. I'm not trying to exalt that, but I need you to listen to me. But there's some security in that. It can be mistaken for trusting God. Boy, he sure is bold. The Lord said, okay. Let's see if you're as bold when you don't have a paycheck to fall back on. And all they can pay is $1,000 a month. And there's 24 of them. Let's see if you're in as big a hurry to run off that 24 when you don't have a paycheck. Let's see if you really trust me like you say you do. Time for you to go. Well, Lord, I'm kind of looking at the calendar and stuff. You know what I can do is I can invest and I can get this and I can get that and I can do this and I can do that. And if I wait just about 2.5 more years with the time I have in grade and so on and so forth, that was a big mistake. Because within a short period of time, every time I tried to lay up something and thinking I'm going to have that money for vacation and that money for sick days and that money for that, something would happen and every bit of that got gone. And then I had a little bit of money in the bank and it got drained. The air conditioner busted, the roof had to be replaced and all this kind of stuff. And the Lord said, what was that you were saying about? Amen. Amen. See, what I was trying to do was pull a Jacob. I was being wise. You know, I'm thinking, okay, well, I can do that and I can lay a little bit aside. And then the Lord's like, no, see, you're still relying on what you got laid aside. You really trust me? Murderer? You'd be as quick to kill them sheep if you didn't think you had enough to float it without sheep, if you had to depend on them to take care of you. Would you not be a compromiser then? Well, I don't know about you, but you know what I had to deal with? I had to know, is this God talking to me? I knew it wasn't my flesh. You say, why? I got to tell you, I loved my career. I did. I know y'all hate police, except when you're in trouble. But that's not as often as speeding, and that's why you don't like them, because, you know, you got caught in one of them little traps where the stick is under the box, and you go by and he pulls the stick out and you get caught in the trap kind of deal. A vehicle equipped with radar detection device. Why do you mean my insurance is canceled? You're a professional speeder. I loved my career. And I was high enough up there that I didn't have to worry about kicking doors and putting myself in harm's way anymore. I could go watch the guys do it, but, I was kind of like, man, that's really good, man. Back in the day, it's like, hey, old man, just stay out of the way and we'll send you the after-action report when you're done. Pretty comfortable. But I had the confidence of knowing I had a paycheck and all the things laid up. And the Lord said, time for you to go. I knew it wasn't my flesh. There is nothing in my flesh that thought it made any sense at all. So now I have to determine, is it God or the devil? Well, you know the story. I went and sat down with the old preacher, drove over there to sit down and talk with him. He'd make time for me. I don't know why he did that, but it was kind of him. He did that on more than one occasion. He said, why don't you tell us about that? I don't tell people all the stuff that went on. He was just kind. I went over and had a private meeting with Dr. Ruckman. You wouldn't want to know about some of those private meetings I had with Dr. Ruckman. Some of them were less than funny. Sometimes he said, you want me to get you some tissues for your tears, sweetie? He's gutting me over an outline. And I'm like, he's like, what are you crying about? I'm like, well, I didn't realize I made such a mess. He goes, what is wrong with you? You want some tissues for your tears, sweetie? He said, I'm trying to help you. And by the time he done, he butchered the sermon. He cut this and cut that and add this and took this. Well, why would I listen to that? He's only been doing it 60 stinking years trying to help me. But the cuts leave scars. So I go over there and I said, can I talk to you? Sure, you know the story. I asked him about leaving, told him what I was dealing with, and he shook his head, pass the salt. I said, with all due respect, I am in the wine press. Now the Lord's put a timeline on me. And now all of a sudden, every day I'm moving this way, time's getting shorter and shorter and shorter, and He's turning that thing down, and man, it is on me. I said, preacher, I need some help. And he said, okay. I said, did you hear what I asked you? He said, yeah. Did you hear me? I said, sir. He said, I said, pass the salt. I'm like, oh, remember Lot's wife. The salt is no good if it's lost its savor, if it be trodden underfoot. I'm looking for everything on salt I can find. You know what he wanted? The salt shaker. He said, I guess, brother, you better pray about that thing and find out what God wants you to do. Good to see you, man. I just drove 6 hours over here. Good to see you, man. Yeah, good to see you. Greatest advice I ever got. You say, why? Because it wasn't him that had me do what I did. I know who had me do what I did. Now, what I did is not maybe for everybody here. So you know what it did? It drove me to prayer. So I put out what I call, here we go. Here we go. Brother Dennis, you know where this is going to go. People will be like, oh my God, he's a Jew looking for a sign. You're an idiot. This is a big decision. I got a wife and a kid and things to think about. You know what I'm saying? It's like a big deal. Lord, I don't want to make a mess of this. I know it's not my flesh, but the devil would sure like to get me to jump off the pinnacle of the temple and ruin my testimony and look like a cotton-picking fool. And I got a church with 24 people in it, and I love them, and I really appreciate them, Lord. But, man, this is a big decision, and I don't know how this is going to play out. So I put out 3 fleeces, or 3 hurdles, just between me and the Lord. Didn't tell nobody. Didn't tell the old preacher, didn't tell my wife, didn't tell my closest friend, didn't tell Brother Jim, nobody. 3 fleeces. Within less than 10 days, he had jumped the first 2. Now, I didn't ask for a Bentley or a Mercedes or have my house paid off or some kind of stupid thing like that. I really wanted to find the will of God. Amen. But it was things that were beyond human attainment. Yep. And it was not financial stuff that you may be thinking about. Just like that. Right over the first 2. And I'm thinking, well, for most people, 2 out of 3 wouldn't be bad, right? The polls are leaning in that direction. But there's that one, the hanging Chad. And time clicked on, and time clicked on, and time clicked on. And the Lord paused. And I said, Lord, what are you waiting on? I'm waiting for you to take your shoes off. Before I give you an answer on the last part, I want to ask you a question. Are you willing to go? Are you willing to stay? When I got to my Bible, I flipped over to Matthew chapter number 26, and I read the Lord before Calvary. He's in Gethsemane, and he's saying, not my will, but thine be done. Not my will, but thine be done. Sweat great drops of blood. There's a struggle. There's a fight going on. He said to me, are you willing? Not audibly. I'm not a 900-foot Jesus at the foot of my bed so I can build a dentist office. I said, okay. I took my shoes off. I said, yes, sir. If you want me to go, I'll go. Then he upped to stinking Annie. Will you go now? See, we had already talked. Well, I know I'm going to go, and we'll go, when I get retirement and all that other stuff. There's that safety cushion, And when I get all that, and let's not be stupid, and let's not get ahead of the game, and let's not be foolish, and let's not be crazy, and don't get whacked out, and that kind of stuff like that. The Lord said, would you go now? See, there's two shoes. Take off thy shoes, plural. One's willingness, one's timing. I said, yes, sir. Would you write your letter? Yes, sir. Okay. Third hurdle. I'm on a plane coming back from, of all places, Mr. Pass the Salt over in Pensacola, 30,000 feet. She leans over and she says to me, she said, I know the Lord's dealing with you about going. I just want you to know that if the Lord wants you to go, I'll go if you want to go, and whenever you want. I said, well, I know what I'm thinking about. She goes, no, if he wants you to go now, we'll go now. She said, I don't want to be the one to get between you and him. Now, you may not appreciate my wife at all, but she's been with me through all that stuff, and she's given up some pretty highfalutin things to be along the line and go from being the wife of a captain of the police department with a little bit of street cred to a pastor of a Pentecostal snake-handling, white concrete building, sagging roof, weeds in the flower pits, 24-person church. Whoo! And some of you run over like a steamroller. She's earned her stripes, every one of them. Amen. You're a punk. But anyway, lest I digress. And she's literally oblivious. It wasn't the blonde in her. She's just like, she doesn't think about stuff like that. That's why she passes out that flight 741 crashing and she's handing them out on the airplane. Like, babe, what are you doing? I'm passing out tracts. That's not the right track for the right moment. Stuffing them in the seats and stuff. It's insane. She goes to the Philippines with me. She's over there eating a piece of cake in the morning on the way to the airport, and she starts hollering and stuff like that, and I shine the light on her. She's got ants that have been all over the cake, and now she's eating ants. And they're biting her, and her lips are swole up. It's horrible. Looked like I'd popped her. I'm like, how are we going to cover this? Baby, you need a burqa. I'm going to be Muslim for a day or two till the swelling goes down. I'm so sorry. I said, I'm sorry too, baby. I wouldn't eat cake with ants on it if I could see it, but it's pitch dark. I said, I'm willing. Are you willing? Don't expect any more light on the subject until you settle Gethsemane. Can I give you one more passage and we'll take a break? I know some of you are thinking, I thought this was going to be about the ministry. Do you remember, I think it was Ian Bounds that said it, but the old preacher solidified it. He said it takes 20 years to make a message because it takes 20 years to make a man. But in the current climate, when Ian Bounds wrote that, men were men by the time they were 13. You can double that now. It takes 40 years to make a man nowadays. You say, why? You're not put under the pressure those guys were put under. You want to know why those guys were great? They were men. Where's all the great preachers now? There's not many men. I mean men. You have to understand that what God gifts you with takes time to hone it down, and you're not everybody else. You're not going to be. You need to be what God makes you to be, but you have to realize it's going to take Him a while to perfect you. Just because you think you are, and you think everybody thinks you are, don't mean He thinks you are. Don't mean He thinks you are anyway. Joshua chapter number 5. We're talking about finding direction. Isn't that what you're looking for?
Amen.
Don't you come to a meeting like this sometimes and really in the recesses of your heart you're going, Lord, would you do something for me? I need some help. Would you agree, Lord, I need some direction. Is that a fair statement? You know, my fellowship's not what it ought to be, whatever it might be. It's not always these great, mighty, big, gigantic deals. Sometimes it's just something as small as a shoe. I got a pretty big foot. It's a size 12. It's amazing, though, how big that foot is and how many times that foot's gotten in my mouth. You'd be surprised how something so big can fit into something so little. And the Lord giving me an illustration, maybe sometimes your mouth overloads your, we used to have a saying, but your posterior. I find it comes back, gentlemen and ladies, to one thing. Willingness. To obey the smallest of orders is what is the key. If there was anything to what I'm trying to tell you, there's no magic in power or in preaching or in delivery. There's no hocus pocus. It requires sweat and time to sit and apply your seat to a chair in order for God to infuse you from your hind end up to teach you some things of that book. There's no potion to give you of a homiletical or hermeneutical outline. Something that has eschatology in it or it happens to have soteriology in it and all that kind of has nothing to do with knowing the certain analytics of preaching. I know the trilateral root word of the Hebrew there that was written in the Chaldean, and in the book of Daniel we see that oftentimes he uses the Syriac version of that and all that. Leave that stuff to Dr. Ruckman, okay? Yeah. You parroting that doesn't make you him. Right. Just deal with one thing. Willingness. Yeah. Now I'm going to put you to the test just for a second. You ready? You want to see if you're willing to take your shoes off? Before this day is over, would you go to that person you have aught with and say, hey, I want to make it right because you know what's happening? It's creating a break in my fellowship with him. Oh, that's what I thought. Yep. Well, appreciate that, preacher. That was real good till you said that. I ain't a-doing it. Give you a biblical illustration. Can I do that? We're Bible believers. Cain comes along. He sees his brother's offering accepted. He brings what he wants to bring. He's still got his shoes on. Here's what the Lord said to Cain. Cain, why is your countenance fallen? He said, well, Lord, you took his, you didn't take mine. And the Lord said, in effect, take your shoes off. Are you willing to do what I want you to do? Sure, Lord, I'm willing to do that. Okay, bring a lamb. Pardon me? Bad connection. Excuse me, too much static on the line. No. Oh, what's the problem? Lord, there ain't but one shepherd in town. You mean I got to go to my brother and get a lamb to play? The Lord's like, yeah, but imagine this. You go to your brother and get a lamb and you get that sewed up with him, then I'll accept you. You know what He said? I ain't taking my shoes off. I ain't doing it. Maybe He said, and the Lord said, the fugitive and a vagabond thou shalt be. But not before He said, sin lieth at the door.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
The personification of Satan, he's going to jump all over you, boy. You say, well, Cain wound up being pretty prosperous and he died and went to hell. You say, why? He had one opportunity to show to take his shoes off. And he missed the will of God. Would you agree with me?
Yes.
Cain. Joseph. Or excuse me, Jacob. Yes, Lord. The older is going to serve the younger. You lie, cheat, and steal to get it. Leave and go on the backside of the desert over there and pick up a wife and come back wrestling in the cornfield. Your brother's going to kill you. You know he's going to kill you. What's the problem? You got a problem with your brother, do you? Or is the problem really you? You're just putting it on your brother. You're speaking for your brother and saying what you think your brother's going to do, but you haven't dealt with yourself, have you, Jacob? Hey, Jake, you want me to bless you? Take your shoes off. Who are you? Not who's your brother. Who are you, Jake? Take your shoes off. He did. But it cost him a lot of years walking around with his shoes on, doing things his way. Even though he was God's blessed, God said, okay, you want to wear those shoes? You ain't going to approach me wearing them shoes. The shoes of self-will. I'll give you one more illustration. I'm going to show you this. We'll go to the barn here, or I'll take a break, or whatever we're going to do. Throughout the Bible, you find the Lord confronting a man or a woman with a fundamental principle of small things to test your willingness to follow Him. He doesn't ask you to jump off the pinnacle of the temple to prove you're spiritual. He asks you to pick up a towel and a wash basin and just wash feet. But sometimes we get too good to wash feet. Jesus knew who He was. He knew exactly what He was doing. You say, why? He was the first one to pick up the towel and the wash basin. I can't imagine the embarrassment of those apostles sitting there while the Lord washing their feet. And they're thinking, you can't take it from Him now. He's already picked it up. Lord, let me do that. It's like, no, the fact that I have to even ask you lets me know you don't know nothing about me, boy. And so He goes about washing feet. Because after 3 years, them boys hadn't learned anything when it came to ministry. They thought it was about promotion, opportunities to preach, calling down fire from heaven to kill those that disagreed with them. And the Lord said, no. It's about ministering to each other. But you wouldn't take your shoes off. Oh, I think I forgot to tell you, you don't usually wash somebody's feet until they've removed their... Do you think maybe it was more than just humility the Lord was teaching in John 13? Maybe it was as if you want me to bless you, you got to be willing to take off your shoes and let me control your feet. Last one. Just talking about the ministry, trying to find the will of God. Joshua chapter number 5. Can we just pick it up in verse 13? This is after the battle and some things have gone bad and so on and so forth. And then notice what he says in verse 13. It came to pass when Joshua was by Jericho, he lifted up his eyes and looked, and behold, there stood a man over against him with a sword drawn in his hand. And Joshua went unto him and said, Art thou for us or for thy adversaries? I've heard a lot of sermons preached there about his boldness to do that. And you can recognize that. Watch how the Lord responds. And he said, Nay, but as the captain of the host, the Lord am I now come. He didn't scream or yell. He just said, No, I'm not on your side or their side. I'm on my side. You see, what he's saying to Joshua is not, it ain't about whose side I'm on. It's about whose side you're on. You don't pick me to join up with you when it's convenient for you, son. This conversation we're having right now is not about whose side I'm on. It's about whose side you're on. He's fixing to lead him into Canaan, make a great leader out of him. We're talking about finding the will of God, right? Moses was his predecessor, is that right? Joshua fell on his face to the earth and did worship and said unto him, What saith my Lord unto his servant? And the Lord said, Well, Joshua, the way I see it is, I'm going to take you over here, and then you're going to do this, and then here's what's going to be, and I'm going to lay out the battle plan, and I'm going to show you how things will work out. And then once that's over, I'm going to ask you, what do you think about it? If I said it, you believe it. Does that settle it? It's the weirdest thing in the world to ask a military general. Look at the passage. Take off your shoe. That's not a plural because of the generic that it's under in the English language. He means singularly. Take off your shoe. Then he says a weird thing. For the ground thou standest on is holy ground. You mean one shoe's on holy ground and the other shoe ain't? People want to know all the time, why did he tell Joshua to only take off one shoe? Because Joshua is where we are today. It's called a split decision. He said, hey boy, if you want me to bless you, you can't be divided between me and the world, between me and your wife, between me and your kids, between me and your husband, between me and your job. I want all of you or I don't want you. Not in service. Take off your shoe, Laodicea. Try and find the will of God. What's the first thing he asked him? Joshua, are you willing to die for me? Joshua, will you lay down your life for me? No, take off your shoe. What? What a silly little thing. Oh, but what a humiliating thing. You know what he's asking him to do? He's asking him to show who he's willing to be a servant to. You willing to do what I tell you to do, Joshua? Yeah, good. Go take Jericho. Yes, sir, Lord, no problem. Go kill Goliath. No problem. Take off your shoe. Or what? What kind of order is that to give me? I'm Joshua, 40 years under Moses. Do you know who I am? And you're giving me some little pipsqueak scrub the toilet order? Take off my shoe? You smoking crack before crack is? I am a general. I'm in charge of the nation of Israel. Okay. Go ahead and have it your way. No, you know what he did? Took his shoe off. You know why Joshua was a great leader? I love to preach out of Joshua 1. Be of good courage, be strong, I am with thee, saith the Lord. Turn not to the right hand, turn not to the left. And man, I love that. But the secret's in the shoe. He said, the ground you're standing on is holy ground. But there's a problem, you're only half committed. you ain't all the way in. And if you're not willing to do the little things, God can't trust you with the big things. Preacher, I got a sermon. I wouldn't preach that. Well, the way I see it. What's the matter? Afraid to walk around your bare feet? Afraid somebody might see your toe jam? Your crooked toes? You afraid they might see where you came from? Or is that just something you say to impress people with your sordid past so that you can be a testimony of God's grace? That don't prove nothing. We're all a testimony of God's grace. Here's the question. You wouldn't be here if you weren't partially committed. But will you take your shoe off? So here's the secret. You ready? Drum roll, please. The secret to finding what God wants you to do is you being willing to do what He said to do. Not wait for the command. I'm willing to do what you tell me to do. There's the secret to the ministry. The greatest man and men I have ever known that are what you and I would refer to as success in the ministry go out fighting with their boots on, are ones that are barefoot in nature. I'm going to get a little spooky. And I probably shouldn't let this part out. I remember the old preacher going around barefooted all the time.